The Scientific Revolution, Empiricism and Rationalism. In this video, we will go through these 5 things as we normally would. The first one is core questions, the methods to guide us to truth and knowledge. Up to this point in the semester, we have not emphasized very much what's known as epistemology, or the study of knowledge. Like, what does it mean to know? How do we come to know something? I mean, how do we know if a claim that someone makes is true or it's false or it's indeterminate? How can we know it? Not just have it as an opinion, something that we believe or that we think is true or we think is false. How can we know that it is? And that's a very important question in philosophy, because it's easy to make a lot of claims. Like, we've encountered some of these before, like everything must have a prior cause. That's assumed in a lot of the medieval arguments, like those proofs for the existence of God. Well, that's an assumption or a claim that's made, and then it's used as a reason in a larger argument. But wouldn't it be nice if we knew if that claim was actually true? It's a matter of, it could be. It may seem very plausible, but how do we know it? And what exactly is involved in knowing something? It's more than just believing. Is it that a belief is true? Well, okay, I could have a belief that's true, say that I could believe that everything must have a prior cause, and that could actually be true in reality, in the world, in the nature of the universe itself. But can I still say that I know it? I believe it. And in fact, it would say it is true. But is that enough to say I know it? No, many people would say we need more. We need justification. That would be what's known as the justified true belief conception of knowledge, where you not only believe something, for example, say this claim or this one, virtuous human princes make for the best leaders. We encountered that during the Renaissance week, the second Renaissance week. And it's nice. Say that this is actually, say someone believes that, say that it's actually true that virtuous humanist princes do in fact make for the best leaders, and that's a true fact of reality. But if I believe it, indeed it's true, you still might not be willing to say that I know, because it's like I don't really have any reason for the belief. Say I just think it sounds cool. That's my only reason. Like, yeah, virtuous human princes make for the best leaders or are the best leaders. Maybe I just like the words. So I could believe it's true. It could actually be true in the world. But would we say I really know it when my only reason for believing it's something like, oh, I like the way the words sound? No, we'd probably say, no, you don't know that that's true. Even though you believe it, even though it's true in the world, you lack justification. You don't have a good reason to believe that it's true. But then to say, well, what would justification look like for a claim like this? Maybe one reads about it, or they live under the rule of many virtuous humanist princes. They have a lot of life experience, and it's always, anytime they had a virtuous humanist prince or princess, doesn't matter, as the ruler, that things were great and they were really good leaders. At that point, the person, we maybe get closer to saying, well, this person knows what they're talking about. They don't just believe that a virtuous humanist princess makes for the best leader. They don't just believe it anymore, even if it's true and it's true in the world, but they don't know necessarily it's true. But then you add on their life experience, and you add on, say that thousands upon thousands of other people have reported the same. Then you can look at what the virtuous humanist prince or princess did in historical records, and you see there was much flourishing, there was thriving, good economy, good social Everybody's getting along with each other. There's no wars. There's lots of things, and you can add all that together, and you got a lot of reasons at that point that are verifiable reasons that can be compared and peer reviewed across many people, and you can kind of get a group consensus, which is not perfect. That's not proof in the sense of 100% absolute certainty, but you have much more justification for your belief that virtuous humanist princes or princesses make for the best leaders. And so the idea is, say, at that point, we might be willing to say someone knows that claim rather than just believes it. So I hope that gives you a sense that knowing is not the same as believing. It's not the same as just having some true fact in your mind. And then there's problems even with the justified true belief notion of knowledge, or there's concerns with it, that there are things called Gettier examples after this guy named Edmund Gettier, where you can have things that you believe that are true and that you have justification for their truth, and yet it might still be a stretch to say that someone knows it. If one wants to see examples like that, they can do an internet search for Gettier, Gettier is how you do his name. And he did a little 4 or 5 page criticism of justified true belief concept of knowledge. But most of the people that we encounter, throughout the semester would be fine with something like justified true belief theory. And so that's kind of the way to think of knowledge. And why know about that? Because this time period in history that we're in, with the time period of empiricism and rationalism, is that knowledge is the name of the game. The philosophy people, the what's known as natural philosophy people, they're extremely focused on what does it mean to know what's going on in our minds. It's when philosophy of mind really takes off. There was a lot of it before, but this is the moment when the shift happens between what's known as the Renaissance into the early modern and then eventually the modern eras. And so a lot's going on in this period. There's a lot more people, a lot more philosophy people. There's a lot more ideas. And then this is when science, and in terms of Western sciences, this is when they start coming into their own. Things change tremendously going forward. So that just gives you a sense. Well, it's kind of like, okay, we've kind of got a feel for knowledge. Say, just hold something like justified true belief in your mind, and kind of hold the example I just talked through in your mind. Just pick a belief, imagine that you believe it, that it's really true in the world, and then ask yourself, well, are you justified in believing it? If you are, you have evidence, you have a lot of reasons, you have a lot of data to back it up. At that point, you might be said to know that belief. That's one way to think of what is knowledge. But remember, there are some concerns even about that notion of knowledge. It's always more complicated, always. But either way, that gives you a feel for knowledge. That also gives you a feel for what this epistemology or epistemological questions are like. The whole focus is on, well, what does it mean to know? What's the nature of knowing? What does it mean to have justification? What does it mean to believe something? What does it mean to desire something? How do our ideas and our mind relate to each other? How does that impact knowledge? How do we achieve truth? How do we acquire more knowledge? Very important questions. All are raised and thought about very thoroughly. But it keeps going. But it all takes off in this period of history we're going into. And so one of the things, what we're focused on today, is wouldn't it be nice? It's better to have knowledge than just belief or opinion. To know something is much more than just thinking it's true. That's a belief, kind of. I think something's true. But if I know it's true, that's more impressive, many would say. So the question is, exactly how are we able to come to know things? How can we get that justification How can we determine if something's true? It's not hard to believe things. We can believe all kinds of things. Belief and opinion are very close. The opinions, everybody has those. From this, one kind of ice cream tastes better than another, and that can vary across individuals. But what we'd want to know is, even if someone's right about it, oh yeah, strawberry ice cream is far better than whatever other kind you can imagine. But the idea is, how can we figure that out to come to the point that we know it, rather than just people claiming it, rather than those claims being true? How can we get to the point where we truly know something? Well, it would sure be helpful to have some kind of method, some stepwise procedure, some 1, 2, 3, 4, or it could go back. You could start at step 3, then go back to step 1. It could be a cycle. It could be linear, but either way, to just have some guide, some procedure to follow that was almost guaranteed to add to our knowledge. That would be awesome. Well, Francis Bacon and Rene Descartes thought so too. And the whole idea is, you want a method or a stepwise procedure that, if you diligently follow, if you systematically, you carefully, even if it takes time, even if it's obnoxious, a sort of way that you can get from point A to point Z. If Z is your goal, and say at the end down there at Z, that's like real truth. That's more knowledge. That's our goal. And we're standing at point A, and it's like, how do we get from here to there? Well, a method, a map, a roadmap, a guide. That's what a method is. You can think of it in the notion like paint by numbers, that say you lack artistic ability, which I certainly do. So I can relate to this example, that say that you could never paint and get all the coloring and the shading right of a picture of, say, a horse or a dinosaur or a nature scene. Say that by yourself, on your own abilities, you could never get the color pattern right. But yet, what can you do? You can go to the store, and here's a paint by numbers thing. And it has all the paints you supposedly need. It has the brush. They may not be the best paints, may not be the best brush. But it's got the picture, and then it's got all of it divided into little numbered areas. And then you have a key that says, okay, where it says number 1, you put red. Where it says number 2, you put blue. And you just follow that. You just, everywhere the number lines up with the color, you put that color where the number is on the page. And then at the end, you get an image if you painted within the lines and did it. If you have that little bit of skill, then the picture is going to look way better than anything you could have ever done unassisted. Well, would you rather try to paint the picture with no guide and just make a big mess, all the colors blurring together? It was meant to be a horse. It looks like a side of a mountain. Not ideal. Versus, would you rather have the image that much more resembles the horse? Well, if you would much rather have the image that resembles a horse, you don't have the artistic talent or the skill set with perception and hand coordination and all those things, and the inspiration, the muses to help you do well at painting the picture, then paint by numbers is invaluable. I've seen people that are very good at doing it, and they're very good at following directions. And so that's what the value of a method is, that if you have a good one, it will take you so much further than you could do unassisted. A method is like the tools, the training wheels to greatness, or that's the hope anyway. And with the right method, if it's one that you can keep reusing, say you keep following paint by numbers, you start to develop a better feel for how colors work and how to make different shapes and patterns on the canvas. Well, then eventually you may make what's known as progress. You started at one place, you had one set of abilities or one way of doing things, and then at some later date, you have more. You have advanced. Your learning has advanced. There's been an advancement of learning. You move forward. And all of these ideas are important to kind of understand and see, yeah, there's something really, really quite valuable when people talk about methods. And And so, well, Francis Bacon proposed a method. Rene Descartes proposed a method. And these two people are not the only two. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of other methods that have been proposed throughout human history. Some of them are very good. The methods that Bacon and Descartes are proposing are methods to try to discover more truth than we start out with. Not belief. We want truth. We want something that's stable, that's there, that once it's there, we have it. It doesn't change on us in the middle of the night. And then the other part is knowledge. Like we want knowledge. We don't just want belief. And so these methods proposed by Bacon and Descartes and many others, they're not the only two, never think they're the only two, are directly related to discovering new truth and the acquisition of more knowledge. And so Bacon, his method, what makes it so interesting is that, well, it's the primordial core of what eventually became the scientific method that we use today. I mean, this is a technical college. That means it's going to be heavily leaning on things like the sciences, the technologies, mathematics, engineering, things like that. It's not the only thing a technical college does, but it's kind of like it's the base level. And so all of our sciences and technologies lean on this notion of a scientific method, of stepwise procedure, a way of helping ourselves avoid error while we're trying to find more truth and you're trying to acquire more knowledge. It's a method that kind of it accommodates or mitigates the worst features of ourselves as humans. It keeps us from leaping to conclusions, and it holds us back from doing that. It says, no, you got to keep doing your data. You need to do your observation. You need to make your good hypothesis. You need to do some more data collection. You need to create a hypothesis that can be falsifiable. There could be defeaters. And then you need to do you need to do your random samplings. You don't need a bunch of relevant bias in there. All these things that go into doing science rather than just reading popular science magazines or watching a popular science documentary. Doing science is very slow. It can be very monotonous. It can be very painful. And someone like Bacon actually describes all of those things way back when, in those years, in 1600. So 400 years ago, just approximate, he was already telling you this is going to be slow. But if you do it, the promise is that you will have a way to discover more truth that you can rely on. That's the promise anyway. We'll see if that all pans out as we go through, especially next week. But the idea is not bad. It's not a bad idea to think that if I could find some stepwise paint by numbers to help me discover more about reality, which is essentially what the scientific method is, it's just a different kind of paint by numbers. And it's a much harder one most times. It's a much more laborious one. It's more time consuming. But the products are evident for everyone to see. Namely, the very class we're in is the result of the scientific method being used. A whole lot of people being very dedicated to figuring out how to write software, how to build an internet infrastructure with a World Wide Web that websites can be on, that and a content management software like D2L. All of that took millions of time and hours in terms of human labor, human effort. And it's all very slow. People had to learn how to do this, and it has a science behind it, but it also has an artistic component behind it. It also has a humanities component behind it of, what kind of material will people actually like, how the screen looks. There's an aesthetics involved in all of it. And so all of those things kind of lean on there being this sort of reliable method and procedure being in place. In terms of any technological thing, whether it's a cell phone, whether it's an airplane, whether it's a car, whether it's a computer, whether it's any piece of software, it doesn't matter. Whether it's a building, whether it's a crowbar or a hammer or a screw or a nail. All of those things took a lot of time to work through and develop. And then, but then they may not have all started with the scientific method. They didn't. Nails have been around a lot longer than the scientific method. But the reality is that now we make them in ways for different applications. And that's learned through trial and error, but a test, a retest, collecting data, hypothesizing that this will make a better nail for this application, and then testing that and collecting all that data and then running experiments. What about these variables, these stresses, these strains, experimentation? All of those things are associated with science. And Francis Bacon foreshadowed and indicated pretty much all of them. Not all of them, but almost all of them. And Rene Descartes added another very important piece to the puzzle. And he has a very different way of thinking in terms of method. But both put together give you many of the moving parts to what eventually becomes science and sciences in terms of the Western world. Now, there's the Eastern world that has slightly different ways. I mean, at this point, there's a kind of a homogeneity that's kind of gone across the world where a lot of people are doing basically the same when it comes to things like science, but not necessarily, not in terms of the way medicine's done. Never think that everybody does it always the same. But in terms of a method, a procedure to follow to kind of rein in humans and our biases, that's become standardized in terms of, and it is a way to gain reliable, at least the ability to create things, to develop technologies, to gain insights into things that maybe we would not have otherwise gained insight in. But it's not the only way. And we'll see with Descartes, there is other options. But all that aside, Bacon, his becomes, really the like Bacon, if you want to think about it, Bacon's got about 75 to 80% of all the moving pieces to a sort of science method. And there's more than just one science method, by the way, that if you're in a research lab as a biologist versus if you're in electrical engineering or mechanical engineering, they'll have like an engineering method. Or if you're in nursing, there'll be a nursing method. And and there may be a more pure science method over in like research biology or something, or geology. But they're all doing very similar procedures. They just use different concepts. They have different names for the steps, and you do different steps in different order. That's why you always, when you think of science method, you should think of like science method just in general, but also all the particulars. The different domains in the sciences use slightly different variations of it. But they all come back to the same idea of wanting to get more truth and acquire more knowledge. And typically in science, it turns into the application. Like we bring people from sickness to health more consistently, more quickly by following a particular nursing method. Or we are able to build better technological stuff by using an engineering methods. And then you can keep going. As a research scientist, we get more reliable natural world laws, principles, patterns. We discover more of them by using a more purely science style method. One that looks like the standard sort of description you'll find in a high school textbook or whatever. But that's a lot of words before we even get into this thing, just so you kind of, to motivate it, to realize the sheer power of what these people were doing. But where does all this come from? How did this come about? I mean, we were talking about medievals just the other day. I mean, we're making big leaps, every single week in time. And this week is kind of like this early modern era is when Descartes and when Bacon are. And it's about this 100-year period, this 1550, 1650. This is when things just went almost crazy with people coming up with, that there was so much that happened so quickly, and change is always very difficult. No, never let anyone tell you that rapid change is fun or it's nice. It's not. It is very difficult on societies. Doesn't mean that the other side of it may not be better. It may be. It may be worse. You're never guaranteed. There was no guarantee when these two people were doing this that everything was going to work out. They didn't know that it was going to work. They hoped. They may have believed. Well, there's always things there's consequences to things. But either way, the historical context. What is it? How did we get to a Francis Bacon and a Rene Descartes? How do we get there from where we were? That's why this historical context is so important. And if you really want to understand why the philosophy people or anybody, whether it's the science people, why it is that they were up to what they were doing, why they were thinking the way they were thinking, what enabled them to even be able to think what they were thinking. That's where history comes in. It's invaluable. One of the key moves that happened is in this Renaissance era. Remember Pico with the humanism. This notion that humans we can be super awesome, and we can be so awesome to doing things and having ambitions and creating things. This notion of creation, that we can make these beautiful paintings in the Renaissance, this beautiful architecture, and that, we can build these big banks, these big economic systems. We can do all these things, amass all this wealth, all this glory. Remember, in the Renaissance, we saw that last week. There was this notion of achieving glory that supersedes the Greek eras or the Roman eras. And that mattered. And there was something that was achieved and that we still talk about the Renaissance. And it was a crucial, pivotal moment in the history of sort of Western history. And because this idea, this reconceptualization of the human being happens, where all of a sudden humility is replaced almost, if not completely, with a pretty big dose of hubris. The very things that the Greeks were like, whoa, no, you don't want to do that. And then the Renaissance, it kind of starts going in. And we can consider that as, it keeps coming back up this semester because it's pivotal in how we end up wherever we are at any point in time. And it matters if humans conceptualize themselves in a more humble role or if they conceptualize themselves in a more we're super awesome role. We can achieve whatever we imagine. Those things make a big difference. And so what happens is you get, when the Renaissance, they advocated for celebrating and putting humanity, human potential, achievements, glory on a super fancy pedestal. The overall humanist ideal that humanity as a whole and as individuals had the innate potential to transform self, societies, and other aspects of reality into creations that even the divine might admire and praise. And even goes as far as that's in that Vives thing of the sort of humanist notion was that we may do things so fancy that even eventually the gods would say, here, have my chair. You've surpassed us. That's some of the idea there. A little bit of hubris, perhaps. But according to many of these humanists, the humanists might one day be kings, queens, be virtuous humanist princes and princesses, not just to the earth, but the entirety of reality itself. Essentially, this inverts the kind of biblical notion of that the world's created in, man's created in God's image, or humanity's created in God's image, to maybe one day humanity will just refashion everything into its own image. I mean, there's heresy built into that too. But the Renaissance people were not, it's not that they were not still Christian-based people, but some of them definitely knew what they were up to. They knew they were doing a fundamental, upending. And some of the clergy, some of the popes, they knew it too. But you add this notion of, instead of human created in the image of the divine, how about reality created in the image of the human? That's where you're starting. I mean, that's a core idea. that had to be in place before you could get something like the scientific revolution. I mean, you didn't have to have it maybe, but it was there, and it propelled it along. Well, on top of that, you get this sort of notion of like this bucking the system. This is showing up in the Renaissance too. That, remember, the humanists, they were finding all these texts. I mean, the Medici and others, very wealthy families, were bankrolling the search to go out and find all these books from. And if you go back and look at that Pico article, at the end of it, he talks about the sort of stuff that he thinks we could all add into knowledge. He's proposing an entirely new educational curriculum where people do not just philosophy, but they look at the magicians, they look at the esoteric stuff, the hermetical stuff's what it's called. And to them, like, magic could be, what you think of in some pop culture, but really what a lot of it was like the early stage chemistry. I mean, not necessarily some that's mixed in with astrology. I mean, we have access to a whole lot of things separated out that were not already separated out at these times. Magic, chemistry, you could mix things together and get a reaction. That's pretty magical. Still is today. Even if you've taken the chemistry class, it's still quite interesting to see things that otherwise are dormant, and then you put them together, and all of a sudden here's this really vigorous reaction. Pretty impressive. And so they didn't understand this stuff. But in some cases, maybe they understood things better than we do. Never shortchange them. That there was things they wrote down that's been lost in time. And that they could have very well made lots of discoveries that we will never trip back over. I mean, that's the tragedy of the loss of information. But what happens during the same Renaissance time is you get this pushback against, like, the controlling position, the governance position of the Roman Catholic Church. And that had to do with not only, it's like a powerful position, it tends to bring in people, and it can turn corrupt. It doesn't say anything about Christianity itself. It's talking about the institution, the governing institution itself, that has a lot of power, attracts people who want power. It doesn't mean that everybody in there is like that, but some will be. And it tends to pull up to the top those that are ambitious and really want something and work really hard for it. They'll tend to achieve that eventually, especially if they don't have many moral scruples. Remember Machiavelli. It's like Machiavelli's given an insight into how things happen kind of behind the scenes in some of these big, powerful entities in governance and all. I mean, not always, but many times. And so there's that sort of kind of corrupt stuff that's going on. And that very devout other Christians, they were able, with the printing press, to start reading the Bible for themselves and say, hey, this isn't necessarily what's happening in the Catholic Mass every day. And that's not the only way that you could interpret some of these words. And so you're getting a break of this sort of Protestantism that wanted reformation, wanted to change the way things are done. Some of them just wanted to be done with Catholicism altogether. And there were a lot of religious wars. But the key to this is that same sort of humanist notion of humans should be free to choose. That we have all this inbuilt, we're sort of this sort of Swiss Army knife that can do a lot of things, and we have a lot of potentials. And we should be free that that an individual's reasoning ability, the individual, might have better ideas than even the establishment, the status quo. And whole groups of individuals should be free to try to follow their path of creative endeavors or worship endeavors or whatever. That's building in. So you got, and you also got this sort of, they've collected all these previous texts from the Greeks and the Romans that were not in play during the medieval period. And there was all this push to include that in new schools and new curriculum. And at this time, this is 100 years span, and they've built these schools where some of these schools are focusing more, they're not being taught by the Roman Catholic Church anymore. They're being taught by, in some cases, more secular teachers. And so at this stage, some of the people that really kicked off, that started to talk about bucking the system, is what's known as natural philosophers. So what are these people? Well, some examples is Copernicus, Bra, that's Tycho, Galileo, Kepler, Francis Bacon, Descartes, and many others. There are many others of these. I mean, there's hundreds of them. And you end up with Francis Bacon's in England, Descartes in France. Some of these others are in Poland. You've got them. You've got them in the Netherlands. You've got, just think of Western Europe. You got these people all over the place. Got them in Germany, yeah, in what is today modern Germany. It had been Prussia and all that at the time. And I mean, you've got these people all over the place. Well, what are they doing? Well, first of all, they're polymaths. That it was possible at the time to learn almost all that there was to learn. You know, it's not like today where all a person has to do is go on the internet and you can be overwhelmed. They go to say, go to somewhere like YouTube and then just type in like history and then see all the documentaries and imagine how long it would take you to absorb, like, just say European history. They just think in terms of college classes, in terms of how much detail we're saturated with today. They say you can have a college class, and I'll just do it through philosophy. You can have a college class like this that does this big survey just skipping across the surface of a placid lake. This is just the beginning. But what happens if you go forward? Well, you can have a class on the ancient Greece, and like that'll be your Plato, Aristotle, pre-Socratic, stuff like that. Well, then you can also have just a class on Plato, and just a class on Socrates, and just a class on Aristotle. I had classes like that in graduate school. But then even more so, what you normally find is you'll have a class just on one book of Aristotle's. Say just on Aristotle's logic, or just on Aristotle's biology, or just on Aristotle's metaphysics, just on Aristotle's physics. And then you can go even more deeper in it, where you have a class on just on Aristotle's notion of, say, form and matter. Or on Socrates, just on Socrates is one thing, the apology, and to fully fill out everything that was going on in it. And you can, but it can be even more detailed. If you think of, say, you can do engineering, well, then say you go into electrical engineering. Well, then you have DC, electricity. Then you have AC. Then you have alternatives to that. You're still going to be DC, AC, but you have different ideas about how to make electrons, move around, or the magnetic fields move around, whatever. And then you can just keep going and going. You can have power systems classes. You can have amplification classes, on and on. And so that's overwhelming. One individual in today's time can be a polymath. You could be decent at engineering. You could be decent at philosophy. You could be decent at history. You could be decent at some of these things. But you can't account for all of it. At this time, they could. They could almost learn all there was really to know. Their curriculum was surmountable. And so what a polymath was is someone that could learn like the mathematics at the edge of what was known at the time. They could learn the philosophy at the edge of what was known at the time. They could learn the sort of pre-science that was known at the time. They could know some of the history as much as could be known at the time. They could know logic as much as could be known at the time. And then what did they do? Well, they could learn all of this, and then they can start expanding the borders of it. They start going beyond what's known because they learn the problems, they learn the limits, and then they want to push past those limits. And that's there was hundreds of people like this at this time. And so what happened is you end up with someone like Descartes that's able to make huge contributions in math. Anytime you've ever done an XY grid in algebra, you have this guy to thank, Descartes. I mean, and what it amounts to is the relationship between algebraic abstract formulas and functions and just transforming them, deriving them. I mean, that's the algebra transformations by the rules of algebra. And then you have the geometry in a two-dimensional or three-dimensional map system with X, Y, Z if it's three-dimensional, coordinate system that you can map, and you end up with lines and curves and all parabolas and all kinds of shapes. But you're able to see what the output, if you put certain things in a function, what you get out. And that's extremely valuable to understand the behavior. Especially, it's not the algebra that's so much important. It's that you can use that algebra to create formulas in, say, physics, that then you can predict the path of a falling cannonball. You can get a spaceship to go from Cape Canaveral to end up where you want it to be outside the planet. It's things like that. Or you can start understanding the moving of the planets and stuff. At least one way of understanding that stuff. And so the Cartesian coordinate system, how geometry can relate to enhance what you're talking about in algebra and in formulas, very valuable contribution. He also did tremendous with vision and optical technology. A lot of these polymath people were lens grinders. They were making better optical, essentially, instrument where you could use a glass and make it concave on both sides, or make one side concave, one side convex. And you can use that to get different types of magnification, different ways of bending light, making photons go where you want them to go. And what you end up with is you have those lens grinders, and so they're working in optics. Descartes was, and he has a whole book that he published about optics and how the eye works. Because you see, if you're working with lenses in glass, it makes sense. You kind of look over there about, what about the eye of the animals? And so they're dissecting animals at this time. So you see, you've got this morphing of lens technology with mathematics combining with biological dissection and mixing that. And then on top of it, you got philosophy, looking for these general principles, trying to use argumentation, and you get a blend of all this stuff. And when you get groups of people that are like that, and they're all together and they're all trying to talk amongst each other, there's language barriers, but most of them could speak similar, like maybe all French or all Latin or whatever. That once you get all that interaction, that's what natural philosophy was. It was a blending of philosophical stuff, sciencey sort of stuff, mathematical sort of stuff, artistic things, magic, chemistry style stuff. All of this, and single individuals are making contributions to all of those domains all at one time. It's like they're not specializing like today, where what do? You go to college, you declare your major or whatever your focus, and then when you get out, you'll be doing one thing. That's not the way it worked back then, So, and this is why, if you ever wonder why is it a PhD, a doctorate, what's the PH? It's a philosophy doctorate. It's why this is where everything else was all together at one time, until someone like Bacon comes along and then starts saying, hey, we may need to break some of this apart. So natural philosophers, they were, at this point in time, they're looking in all these domains. These are very smart individuals. But what made a huge difference at the time was what was going on in astronomy. That you had the medieval worldview, or the medieval view of the universe, where we've talked about that, where the Earth is the center of the center of the whole universe, and we're surrounded by transparent, rotating spheres. We can see through them, but they're there, and the planets and the stars are embedded in these moving spheres. It's not, our planet may be turning and rotating, but everything else is rotating around us. We're not rotating around anything else. Everything, we're the pivot upon our axle that everything's turning around. That's geocentrism or terracentric view of the cosmos. And from standing on Earth, no, it looks just like that. So, it's not like this was crazy. Don't ever think that it may sound weird to us today, but no, the observations were there. Those pesky planets, though, what they call the wandering stars, their motion where the planet goes one way for a little while, then turns around from our point of view on Earth and looks like it goes backwards, that retrograde motion, that was the bug in the system. That was one of these things that was like, hey, we can get the star motion, we can get the sun and the moon with the earth in the center, but these planets going weeble wobble and kind of drunkenly going back one way, then the other way for a little while, then going on off normal, like these zigzags. Like think of the Z of Zorro or an S shape, and then your planet's doing that over multiple nights. And they observe the sky. That's why I said it's always helpful to actually go and kind of be familiar with the sky, the night sky and the way things move over days and days and days. And you can see videos of it on YouTube. But if you kind of understand that they're seeing these things, they're trying to understand it. And so what's happening though is you're ending up with proposals about how do you account for those sort of retrograde motion of the planets, and you're getting people like Copernicus doing the math and doing these distance calculations and saying, yeah, this don't work. That it would make more sense and things would work out better. The numbers would work better if the Earth was moving around the sun and other planets going around the sun too. Then we don't get, then we can account maybe for this retrograde. What it looks to us, it's not actually moving that way in the actual sky. It's just because we're moving and it's moving and we're all rotating around this sun, the heliocentric notion of the universe, which had been around way back. Some of the early Greeks, in the era around almost pre-Socratic time, proposed this. But that's not the model of the universe that stuck. Instead, it was Ptolemy's model in the 150-ish era that it was the idea that the Earth now is the center. And then that got kind of concretized and ossified in the academia, in the curriculum. And just like today we have things that in 100, 1,000 years that you in science or whatever that or history, that you're taught it one way and then something totally is different. That it happens. It happens. We don't have access to everything all at one time. But what was happening is you also end up with those lenses and telescopes. Then you have Galileo coming along and you have Kepler coming along, and they're looking up there and seeing Galileo's seeing like these moons orbiting Jupiter, what he named the Medicean stars. Why did he name them that? Because his patrons and bankrollers were the Medici. They were financing pretty much all of this Renaissance work, whether scientific, artistic, whatever, philosophical. And so Galileo's seeing that. So now we've got things orbiting something that's not the Earth. That's not too nice. How's that supposed to work? And then, in terms of the medieval view of the cosmos. And then it's also that, the big move though is to dethrone the Earth as the center. And that was not a very welcome thing. If you don't know this, Galileo was put on house arrest and he had to recant his theories. The church said that, that he was doing things that are heretical by contradicting what? The medieval view of astronomy. And why is that heretical? Because it goes against the standard Catholic-based education system, standard curriculum. And it also biblically can be problematic. And so it's like, that's the sort of environment that, say, Descartes writing in. That's the environment. It's and then you have Francis Bacon too. So in the middle of all of this telescope development, you got military technologies like cannons, gunpowder. That was happening back over with Machiavelli. Like the French just rolled through Italy. Why? Because they had a lot of cannons and stuff, and the Italian mercenaries didn't. Well, in military technology, it's like when it takes a leap forward, everybody that used to have been able to put up an equal battle, all of a sudden, or a battle that could go either way, all of a sudden it's just steamrolled over. And so there was a lot of these technological developments. And then the printing press is throwing pamphlets around everywhere. People are able to print out all these books and all these things, and information is being spread. The printing press is equivalent to like the 20 years or so ago with the internet arriving. And then so much changed so fast. A new piece of technology, especially if it's a communication technology. I mean, it just changes so much, so fast. Now, that's kind of the stage setting of what was going on. So, I mean, so at this point in time, you have all this information, you have all these claims that are being made. And so the idea is, okay, well, which of those is true, which is false? How do we figure out, how do we acquire more knowledge rather than just a whole bunch of people making a whole bunch of claims? How can we actually sort the accurate from the inaccurate? That's something someone like Francis Bacon wanted. That's the Novum Organon. Anybody that's in science or you plan to have a career in science, you will be so well benefited to actually look through this book, because it's kind of the moment of Western science. You should look at a lot of other books too. But this is where the mentality, the sort of way, the justification for it, the defense essentially of why do it this way in terms of science rather than other ways. And I'm not saying that every one of Bacon's reasons and argumentation is successful or that it's accurate. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is it shows you kind of what it took to get science off the ground. And Bacon was very smart. I mean, in terms of being able to write and put it all together in one package that a person can just buy, the Novum Organon. This took a long time for him to write. And just the ideas, I'm not saying it's perfect. You have a digital copy of it in the class this week. You can look through it at your leisure. But the key to it is that, to start off, is there's this break. That Bacon's like, okay, we see this philosophy stuff, reasoning, and the way it's working logic, and the way it's been done in sort of the medieval kind of universities. But we've also seen like this Pico stuff where they're like, hey, let's just pull in all these ideas from the ancient magicians and ancient astrologers and ancient everybody. I mean, Pico wasn't a fan of the astrologers, but the astronomy stuff. And it's like we need to, pulling in all this stuff and all these new claims. And Bacon's like, whoa. All right, so what are we doing here? Is that the way we really want to go forward? Do we really want to go forward with the medieval sort of, curriculum that's built in with Aristotle's the main philosophy person? We have the medieval view of the universe. That those things don't seem to be holding up with the telescope technology, with the mathematics that's developing, the observational patience and skill that was developing. So maybe that medieval curriculum is not going to work for us and that way of doing philosophy. Well, then we have the Renaissance people of just this eclectic, let's just get a big pile of all of it, and anything that's old is better than what's current. It's an inversion of maybe contemporary times, but that's the way it worked in their minds. And, it was exciting, and we want all this new schools that are teaching all this stuff that's actually hundreds and thousands of years old, but it's new to them. It's different than the curriculum they were accustomed to. So you're getting humanist universities forming. You've got your medieval Roman Catholic style universities. And Bacon's like, yeah, but are either of those getting us closer to truth and knowledge? And Bacon would say, no, not in comparison to getting new knowledge, making new discoveries, that our education system is so far lacking in all this humanities and this medieval stuff that they're not enabling us to make new discoveries. That we're just learning about what other people claimed and what they thought they knew and the way they reasoned about things. We're not actually blazing our own path in the world. But a group that is are the mechanical art people. At this time, you have clock makers, you have this blacksmithing, and making these super fine clock parts. You've got compass people, you've got new fabrics, new ways of dyeing fabric. You've got the printing press technology. You're getting more and more machine technology. The medievals had a lot of gears and cogs and water wheels and windmills. But I mean, this is getting into the metal gears and the metal parts and chains and on and on. And it's like, Bacon could see where the mechanical arts, the vulgar, common arts, these things you have to do with your bare hands, that was thought of like maybe somewhat today, that there's something more fanciful where the elite are going to college and they're doing all these high-minded things where they don't get their hands dirty versus what the old mechanic's doing in the garage. Well, Bacon's like, no, the mechanic in the garage, that person's making new discoveries. That person's taking and making prototypes and creating these new technologies like a better watch and a better compass so we can discover whole new places, find stuff, bring it back to England and France and Spain based on what they're doing. What are we doing in the ivory tower? That's Bacon's idea there, because Bacon he had all these jobs in the government, and he's like, we just have a lack here. And so what he proposed is a breakaway, not necessarily from philosophy in general, but a breakaway from the way it had been done. And so his proposal is to create he's going to give a method that just pure philosophical work wasn't sufficient to achieve all the knowledge and the human ease and comfort. That's what Bacon wanted, was to get more truth about reality in the world so that we could use that to give it to the mechanics, to the technicians, to build new things. That's why, you have science of today, like the physicists are doing something, then those ideas get pushed out to the engineers that then capitalize on that. A lot of times a physicist and engineer kind of blend at times on the cutting edge of things. And then they make new devices, new technologies. And so Bacon's, he was projecting forward. He had the vision of what it could be. And then it's like, okay, but it's not just a matter of breakaway from philosophy. He's proposing a whole new system of learning, a whole new system of knowledge acquisition based on a method. And then I go through these things. In this Novum Organon book, that's the new instrument. And then he has another thing, the advancement of learning. He wrote a lot. But these are the two big ones if you want to kind of get a feel for the whole idea of just the very proposal to have a science as it's in the Western world today. And that he does, first thing he does, he tries to address his theological criticism of, well, isn't wanting too much knowledge what got us into the fall with Eve and Adam and the serpent? Like seeking after knowledge. Well, Bacon said, no, that was just knowledge of good and evil. Any other kind of knowledge is fair game. That's kind of the way he responds to it. Whether you find that convincing or not, you can decide for yourself. Well, then he tried to articulate and defend these specific criticisms of what was pure philosophy at its time, which is your medieval Catholic school education or your new Renaissance, the humanities style education. Pure Greek, Roman stuff that hadn't been around, and all this new eclectic stuff. And then he provides many reasons to support the idea. This is helpful, very important too, that even starting with Bacon, he realized, and a lot of these people at this time realized how faulty the senses are. Like, we think we see things that aren't there. We think we hear things that aren't there. We feel something and think it's smooth when in fact it's rough. We just didn't rub it the right way. Like, think of taking and rubbing your hand one way up down a dog's back, like a dog with like thick kind of stiff fur, versus going the other way, like against the grain is much rougher than if you go with the grain of the fur, or on wood, same way. And so, that we can get confused, that our senses, we seem like sight, hearing. Oh yeah, it's totally reliable in everyday thing we think it is, but it's actually not. And that's one of the very first things that they've definitely figured that out. Well, then also our very minds, like we have biases, that we have a tendency to hear one thing and then leap way beyond that conclusion. We see just one or two instances or something and then just assume that's the way it is everywhere. Like an example would be if we see like two red cars that are really fast. And we're like, well, it'd be totally human to say, well, every red car, you throw the next one coming, you think that's got to be fast too, right? That's not the best example, but just think in terms of if someone is mean to you and then another person's mean to you, and say that it's at a particular, school or something. And then all of a sudden you may be like, well, there's just a bunch of mean people here. Well, that may not be true. You've only encountered two or three, but it's human to leap to that next generalization. And he says, well, we need to rein that in. And he describes how to do that. These are like the cognitive biases. And this is crucially important in doing science, especially statistical science. You want to eliminate relevant biases. Bacon's talking about it right there. Then he said these new discoveries, these new knowledge, these new truths would be new aspects of truth be found not with 100% guarantee. And it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of time. But if we follow a good method, a sort of stepwise procedure, we can slowly but surely reveal more and more. It's like a slow accumulation of aspects of truth and knowledge. And it's written here, and you certainly want to look through that. Because that and what does he want sciencey people to do is to create natural histories of elements. And he goes through in book 2, he gives you demonstrations of what he means by all this stuff. I'd encourage anybody that's in science or just interested in how science started, the Western sciences, to read Novum Organon. It's not the easiest to read it, but it's worth the effort. You just want to get a good copy where it's not the old English, it's more modern English. So essentially, he undertook and achieved no small feat. And that he essentially laid the practical foundation for what becomes a scientific method and the sciences themselves. I mean, Bacon laid the practical, the concrete, on the ground pieces to assembling a stepwise method and procedure, a way of thinking, an empirical worldview. I mentioned that all the way in the first week of the class. This is where it takes off, is with Bacon. So when you read Bacon, you're seeing the beginnings and the moving. I mean, he's got it much developed, where you treat experience and doing experimentation in a very methodical way, and you use experience as your evidence. And that's how you build up knowledge and you get to truth, is through experiences, sensory experiences, reined in by very carefully crafted experiments, so that our eyes don't fool us, our ears don't deceive us, so that you eliminate the human failings of our perceptions, and you just take the results off of the experiment itself, rather than just kind of thinking we see things and all. No, test to make sure that what we think we're seeing actually is what we're seeing. You measure things, you quantify things, all the things that you would associate with contemporary science. It's not the exact same, but it is all the right pieces. It's all the pieces. And then Bacon contends that all of this is the final thing, that Bacon contended consistently that what he's talking about shouldn't be seen as violating these sort of church prohibitions. And this mattered at the time, because think of Galileo's getting charged with heresy and having to recant. I mean, you could be punished for this. The church may not have been as powerful as it used to be, but it was still very powerful in certain cities and domains and whole countries. And Bacon contends he's not changing. He's not doing anything that really violates the theologic and the spiritual, the religious stuff that was going on with the Roman Catholic Church. That's what he claims. He wasn't violating anything to do with Christianity. But Bacon is all about, what is science for Bacon? What is the method? What is the output? Well, it's to create more human ease, more human comfort. Via what? More technologies, more things like that, more ability to control nature. That's where Bacon, he mentions this a lot of times, is making nature reveal things that nature don't reveal. It's like it puts humans at odds, and nature and humans are opposition, where nature, we want to see the truth, and then nature's trying to cover it up. Or we want to, and so what Bacon says, you do experiments to capture nature and then make nature do what you want. It's this notion of controlling, intervening in natural processes, that nature wants to zig and we make it zag. Things like that. And so that humans are morphed into the conception. This is a reconceptualization, just like happened with the Renaissance. And this one matters because this one is stuck. I mean, both of these have held on tremendously throughout all these years. then one can see, is this a good or a not so nice consequences to these ways of conceptualizing the human relationship to the natural world. Bacon's retooling that. I mean, that's what the empirical worldview does, is instead of humans being in, say, a divine creation that they didn't create, and that they should have humility before that creation and be stewards of it and tend to the world as it's a gift. It's a privilege to have such a gift, to be able to marvel at and to observe, but you don't try to go changing things around. You have humility. Whereas Bacon's like, no, you go in there and you take that frog and open it up and peer inside and then try to make the frog's parts move. You know, if they'd had electricity at the time, he'd been trying to make the frog dance. Can we reanimate the frog? You know, or, oh, here's the insides of a tree. Can we make this tree's leaves change color by injecting this chemical into it? You know, that's Bacon. It's like, it's not a matter of reverence for and respect for. It's more like, no, go, you know, peer inside, do what you want, see what happens. But all with a direction toward human ease and comfort. And so it's making nature the lab of humanity, rather than nature and the world being, you know, this gift that people are caretakers of. Now, Bacon's not saying, you know, go and just tear up everything, but it is a mentality of humans can control nature and we should do so. In reality, in order to, we want more knowledge, we want more truth. What? To create more human ease and comfort, to make better sailing ships, to make better cannons, to make better printing presses, to make better sailcloth in the textile industry, you know, to do these things. And so that makes humans controllers and exploiters of the natural world, rather than, you know, reverent observers and caretakers of the natural world. Fundamental reconceptualizations happening there. So you can ask the question, I mean, did Bacon build, you know, kind of inject something that's good or not so good into the reconceptualization of this relationship between humans and the natural world? And does that actually violate some of these, you know, sort of tenets of things like good stewardship that's built into, say, Christianity or in other world religions? You know, it's a different thing. Well, next we turn to Descartes. Descartes is doing similar stuff in some ways to Bacon. The similarities is that they both thought that the education system of the medieval and the Renaissance, the curriculum, the argumentation techniques, they were lacking. Bacon thought they were lacking more than Descartes did. But both of their solutions to this problem, like we have this lack, we want more, we want to access more truth, we want to acquire more knowledge. They both agreed we need a method to do that. They both thought that the human senses and mental and abilities are not that reliable. And this is a key thing to this era in history in terms of philosophy and epistemology questions, is that pretty much all of these people, these rationalists and empiricists, which we'll talk about what that means by, you know, soon, but the idea is that human intellect, our mind is limited. We can't understand everything. We're slow. It takes us time, and we can think and reason our way into a blind alley where we think we're going somewhere, but no, we've just confused ourselves and tied ourselves in knots. And, you know, or we could think we see things and are so certain that we saw something that really didn't happen. We brought our own preconceptions to an event, and then we attribute that and interpret the event in terms of that rather than what actually happened. You know, we read into facts of the world what we want to see rather than what's actually there. So our mind is not necessarily our friend when we're trying to get the truth and trying to acquire more knowledge. And that's still true today. I mean, they weren't wrong about this. I mean, it's something that anybody in philosophy is very well aware of. So we're limited. It's like we have error and such high capacity for it built in. The cognitive sciences, if you want to see all the studies, just look up the notion of cognitive bias. and there's tons of this stuff. I'm not saying everyone that's ever been proposed is accurate or as critical as some would say, but there is such a thing. And it's not a matter of it's just bias in that if we hear 10 people that we trust say something, we tend to think, well, that's true. But the reality is all 10 of those people could be mistaken. They could all be watching the same thing or reading the same stuff, and they've created a sort of echo chamber that we're hearing what everybody's saying and everybody's agreeing with everybody. But if we walked outside those 10 people, we could find 100 that are thinking entirely different. It's all too human. So our mind and our mental abilities and what we think is going on is not necessarily what's actually going on. We don't have enough time to figure out everything that's happening all at one time. We tend to have our little lives and our little worlds, but when you're trying to get at like truth, objective truth, or you're trying to acquire more legit knowledge, these kind of things have to be accounted for. And so Bacon thought that, Descartes thought that. And then they both thought that their methods would serve as helpful correctives to be able to more efficiently, more consistently get to truth and more knowledge. But Descartes starts to significantly differ from Bacon in terms of the exact details. First of all, Bacon's method is based fundamentally all the way up, all the way down on experience, which is sensory perception. But he thinks that the experimentation component to what he's proposing will rein in so that we can correct and say, we think this thing, we measured it and weighed this. Well, then we can remeasure it. And we can get someone else to measure it too. And we can use a different measure, but it's supposed to be the same gradations on the measuring tape or the scale. And then we can experiment and not trust our first measurement. That he thinks we can do that and catch where the sensation and stuff is messing up. And yeah, that happens today in standard science. It still happens that way. You never just trust your instrument. But you want your instrument to be what determines things, not just what you feel is the case, and so you want, that's why, getting them dialed in just right, and especially like these high-end microscopes and stuff and high-end telescopes, you can have a lens just out of alignment, and then you think you're seeing something that's actually not there. It's just a reflection because they're out of alignment. So you need that adjusted right. And so, but if you get that, you can trust the instrument, trust the tool to mitigate the worst excesses of human sensation experiences. And that's how Bacon thought it could be resolved. Well, he is experience all the way down. In the world, he even says that you start in the world, you end up in the world, that the sensory experience, sight, sound, touch, hearing, that's the determiner of finding a new aspect of truth, finding new knowledge. Whereas with Descartes, it's different. A little bit. That instead of proposing this sort of grounded in sense experience, but sense experience, the worst excess is mitigated by experimentation, you end up with Descartes starts with a method of doubt. So Descartes is in the mind, where the first thing we should do, whereas what Bacon's trying to do is, like I said, trying to make a practical foundation for science, like what do we do in the lab on a daily basis? Whereas what Descartes, he's coming at it more from the traditional pure philosophy side of things. He's working in all the same things and doing all the same things that Bacon's doing, but Bacon's coming at it from the point of view of the mechanical arts. The machine works, the technician, the engineer is the way Bacon's approaching this method. By contrast, Descartes coming at it more from a philosophical, analytic, in the mind way of thinking of it. And so what Descartes wants is a foundation, a metaphysical grounding to the science stuff and the method. More, he wants to get it so we know we have an absolutely certain starting point. Whereas Bacon's like, hey, go forth, grab up all this stuff, start poking, prodding, just do it according to the slow way with experimentation, and just record everything you find, create what he called natural histories, and just record all that. Don't and write down the things, some of your conclusions, but don't go too far away from what you're actually seeing. People need to be able to reproduce this. I mean, he's all like Bacon is to go forth, do great things. He thought this could be all wrapped up and done pretty quick too, by the way. Bacon did. Little did he know. He didn't know that he was creating something that would still be going to this day. I mean, Bacon, he may have imagined it, but the way he talks is, we'll get this all wrapped up, get all there is to know about reality, how to control it. And we'll go out there and get that done in a few decades. Or just 10 years, 5 years. He says things like that. Just think, was science all wrapped up and done, in 1660? Nope, not by any stretch. It is just getting its legs under it. But whereas Descartes, though, is approaching from more philosophical direction, which at the time is starting in the mind, that the assumption is that we can get to truth more cleanly by thinking first, not going out in the messy world of sense experience and, in the mud and the blood of the frog and all this stuff. First, you sit down and think, is there any way we have somewhere to bring these sensory things back to and to judge them as accurate or inaccurate? Well, for Descartes, in the mind is where we can do that. That may sound different today to today's world where we think of, experimentation. We think of all these things. Keep in mind that and just because the sort of Baconian way of thinking about things is kind of, it's run in a more widespread position today, there is something to be said for what Descartes' doing. You don't want to underestimate how powerful what he's up to is, because the Baconian science, keep in mind, it's based on sense experience. It's empiricist, meaning that sense experience is ultimately the ground. Experiment can correct, yes, but it's still based on what we see, what we hear, what we touch, what we think those things are. Whereas Descartes' like, that isn't good enough, that we can doubt any sense experience. Every single one of them can be doubted. It don't matter if the doubt is kind of a little weird, even if it's science fiction-y, if you can raise one doubt against what you think you're seeing or what you think the measurement is, or that you think that given that this has happened in the past, it's going to happen in the future, these repeated events, just because we think that's what's going to happen, or we perceive that as happening, we experience that as happening, that doesn't mean that any of that's accurate. The Descartes wants something more than that. So what he does with his method of doubt is the first thing we're supposed to do is take any belief you have. Like I used one here, a simple one. I see a gray cat in front of me. Then see if you can doubt it. Well, sure. I see a gray cat in front of me, but what if my eyesight's not so good? Which it's not at times. Might I be seeing a possum, a gray possum? Maybe. No, I don't think it's that bad. I don't think I would mistake a kitty for a possum or a raccoon or a small dog. Just keep thinking about it. But, maybe my eyes are tired for staring at a screen for hours of day after day after day. And, maybe it's a little poodle. Maybe. So I have a belief. I see a gray cat in front of me. I could really believe that, but I could doubt it. Well, Descartes say if it's at least possible to doubt it, well, that's not a good starting point. Not when we're trying to get a firm foundation for what we can lay all of these other sensory, sciencey things on top of. And he says, so if you can doubt a belief, you must doubt it. That's the way the method of doubt does. And he's not saying you're going to doubt this stuff forever. It's just this is how you get started. You do this in your mind. You say, okay, what beliefs do I have about the world, about reality? It can be about cats. It can be about the motion of the planets. It can be about the human place in the cosmos. It can be about how the law should work. Any belief you want, if it's based on sensory experiences, Descartes is going to say that it's going to fail. And he's probably right about that, because it seems like it's normally, possibly, in principle, possible, potentially able to be doubted. Anything that's based on sight, sound, touch, feel, or technologically assisted versions of that, you can almost always come up with something. Well, what if this is the case, that'll make doubt appear? And so Descartes would say, well, if it can be doubted, if a belief can be doubted or a claim can be doubted, then it must be doubted. That's the way this works. And so what is he doing? He's trying to eliminate all of the things that can be doubted to see what remains, to get to the solid core, the truth, the undoubtable, the absolutely certain, just rock bottom of our minds. And in terms of these claims are about the world. So if we can get to the bottom of what has to be true in our own minds, then we know that has to be the case. Then Descartes' hope is we can build upon that. So the first thing in the method of doubt is just to strip away everything that can be doubted. And then whatever remains is where you restart and try to build off of. So it's kind of like taking a house that's got termites in the walls, in the attic, in the carpet. You got bugs in the carpet, but you look and you say, well, the foundation isn't bad. So you say, I want to have a house here. So you just take out all the termite boards. You take out everything that's got woodworms, got whatever. You got dirty curtains. You take all that out. And then whatever remains, that's what you use to then rebuild off of. Whatever it is. Well, sensory stuff, Descartes is going to say, is going to fail. Then the next thing is you can say, well, what else remains if I lose sensation, the five senses? Well, I still have a body, don't I? Well, do we? Is it possible to doubt the belief that I have a body right now? Whatever me is inside this body with hands and feet and torso and has a head and all that stuff. Descartes say, well, can you doubt that? Well, I used a more modern example. Could our brain be like in a science fiction thing in a vat somewhere with electrodes hooked up to it? Then maybe there's other people that have bodies, but maybe we're just a brain in a vat somewhere that's being fed electrical impulses and chemical pulses that create a whole world like the Matrix trilogy, the science fiction trilogy. Is that even imaginable? Well, absolutely it's imaginable, because there's movies about it. There's science fiction books about it. And so we can imagine that as happening. Well, does that mean it's ever actually possible? Well, I don't know. Technology advances very quickly, or it gets more complex and more new interventions all the time. So is it possible to one day reach that level of technology where you could generate a whole simulated world? And there's simulation theorists that talk about this. I don't know if they're right or wrong or accurate or not, but the idea is people can't conceive of this stuff. And if humans can think of a technology, what looks like science, what is science fiction in 100 years or 20 years may be science fact later down the road. So it is possible that a technology that could create some simulation and where a brain thinks it has a body and has a whole world, but it actually doesn't, is possible, at least to imagine it and conceptualize the possibility. Well, Descartes would say that's enough to say, well, then you don't have absolute certainty about your own body. And if you can't have absolute certainty, it means you have the slightest of doubt. Maybe I could be a brain in a vat, not know it. Maybe. It doesn't mean it has to be the case. It's just a possibility of doubt is enough by the method of doubt. We have to get rid of that. That's not 100% certain foundation that we can build on. So now we've lost the five senses. We've lost our bodies. Well, what remains? Well, if we keep going, and I tried to make this interesting the way I describe it here, because it is interesting to see and we're doing all this in our heads, by the way, sitting in the armchair. We're not out in the field doing experiments like Bacon. Descartes' method doesn't start in the field. It starts in the head, in the mind. Well, the mind may not all be in the head. There's theories about that too. But extended mind theory, for those who are interested. I did a lot of work in that in the dissertation. It's actually quite interesting. But still, that okay, so well, we've kind of thought about it, that even if we have no body, if we have a brain, well, there's still this mind or the identity's still there, isn't it? Like we're still us. Even even if it is a simulation, there still seems to be a robust sense of, well, there's me, there's an I, and there's you out watching this video. So the thing is even if we are brains in vats, we're still us, right? We still think that we have bodies. We still think that we have sensations that may not be the most reliable, but they have something. And so the idea is, well, can we doubt that there's a we or an I? Like can I doubt that? The belief that there's a me right now, that there's a, think about it. Can you doubt that you exist? You've doubted the sensations, got rid of that. You've doubted the body, got rid of that. But can you doubt that your very self exists right now? Well, no, Descartes would say. That's a good thing for Descartes. The idea is every time we try to doubt that we exist, we reaffirm that we exist. How does this work? It might initially sound a little weird. It's not, though. That if you think about it, in order to make the attempt to doubt that you exist, there has to be a you that's attempting to doubt that there's a you. So it's like every time you try to doubt that you exist, well, you're reaffirming that indeed there is a you that's trying to doubt that you exist. And you get in this loop where you can't, Descartes thought we could not get around this, and we wouldn't want to, actually, because if we didn't exist, we have nothing, and that's not a very good thing to build anything on. I mean, at least not, with Descartes and the way they thought at the time, and still to this day, nothing seems like a pretty poor starting place. There's nothing to work with. But the thing is Descartes would claim that it's like cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Or I doubt, therefore I am. That the very fact that you try to doubt your existence reaffirms that there's a you that's in existence right now trying to doubt it. So you just keep reaffirming, yes. And he's like, well, this is great. That's right. I cogito ergo sum, or cogito, it's been a while since I took Latin. Pronunciation, maybe not the best. But the idea is the more you try to doubt yourself, the more you reaffirm that you do. And the more you try to doubt the existence of you, the more you reaffirm there's a you that is currently existing that's trying to doubt it. And so that's a 100% certainty, according to Descartes. It's a true fact about the world. It's a true objective fact. Actually, at least in your own mind, which is weird. Normally you think that's subjective. But for Descartes, this is a true fact about reality, at least as we're in it right now, is that we exist. And we can figure that out. We can discover that truth for ourselves by trying to doubt that we do. And we're going to fail. That's Descartes' claim. I mean, you can test it. Try to doubt that you exist. See if you can really do it. I mean, you may doubt that you exist as you think you do right now. But do you doubt that there's some existing something that you associate with the I or whatever, that there's a you that's there that's doing the doubting? And if you can't break out of that, then it would seem like Descartes may very well have found an interesting truth just in the head, right out of the gate. Pretty neat. Yep, a true fact that we can be 100% certain about, your own existence. That's pretty neat. At least right now, at this moment, every time you try to doubt, you reaffirm it. Now, you could forget. You can say, I'm not doubting it right now. And then, it may get uncertain again. So you go back. Well, let me try it again. And then, yep, I'm still here. I mean, it's interesting if you take it for what it is, what he's up to. But, I mean, there is something to be said. If a person could actually be 100% certain that they exist right at a moment, then you may think, well, of course we do. But remember, if you're running with the method of doubt, that is not so certain. until you confirm it. I mean, that is your, if you want like reasoning, like argumentative, what's known as proof in argumentation, if you want evidence, well, what you're getting, how do you prove that you exist? Descartes would say, you try to doubt that you do and see what happens. And if it keeps failing over and over and over and over and over again, is there a point at which where you're going to say, well, yeah, sure, I got to exist? Now, is that 100% proof? Is that no way to doubt? Descartes thinks so. But then again, then you run into a problem because Descartes can't be happy with that. He's like, well, maybe though there's this, I could imagine that there's this all-powerful demon deceiver. It's all-powerful. Ooh, not good. Don't like those all-powerful things that are bad. Well, it could deceive us. Could make us dream that we're doubting when we're really not. That could just confuse us about everything and systematically deceive us. And so maybe when we think we're doubting and that we are affirming our existence, maybe it's just confusing us about that. If it's all powerful, it could surely it would have the power to do it. Well, that's something that's got to be eliminated, that possibility, according to Descartes. That could be like an ultimate defeater. It's a terrible, nasty possibility. We thought we existed at least. I mean, it wasn't much to go off of. We have no sensation. We have no body. But we had our one little twinkle of existence. And the Descartes like, well, what if there's this all-powerful demon deceiver? And keep in mind the context. You're in like 1600s where you have Christianity in play as it is today. But I mean, it was in full force at this time. And the idea is, devils and demons and angels and God and all this stuff. And it's like a possibility of a very powerful, malicious demon that could be manipulating a human being's mind. Well, I mean, yeah, sure. It's still possible today. No doubt about it. Some people believe to more or less degrees. But the thing is not even just Christianity. I mean, the idea of demons and evil spirits, that's in tons of world religions and spiritualities. It's not just one, it's in many. And so an idea of good beings or decent, not totally bad to humans. That's present too. But the idea is, so it's a possibility. I mean, there's a lot of people who would believe there's such a possibility. Descartes may or may not have been one of them. But you can conceptualize that there could be such an entity. If you can't eliminate that possibility, you've got a forever defeater of any hope of getting science off the ground. Or science or philosophy or anything, law, all of it will be based on nothing. It could all be a dream or deception. Because you don't know if it's real. And remember, this is a metaphysical foundation. This is something to set all this other less certain stuff, like what's going on with the sciencey stuff that Bacon's up to. Bacon's trying to find something that can serve as a constant basis, so that all this less certainty stuff, and even Bacon admits that we make mistakes, and it could be more probabilistic than 100% certainty. I mean, that's typical empirical stuff. I mean, sometimes people think that science is crazy making absolute certain proofs. It's not really the way it works. Trust me, I've worked in it in terms of engineering long enough to know that you have really good things that you think, yes, this is going to work this way. All the models indicate it's going to work that way. And then there can be unaccounted for variables that it don't work that way. So what was proof becomes nothing. It becomes a total error. Now, that's not reported, though, as much as the seeming successes. But it works right up until the point it don't. That's just the way of science. I mean, of any of the sciences, it's the same way. It don't matter if it's physics. It don't matter if it's electrical engineering. It doesn't matter if it's biology. Theories rise and fall in science. It's not perfectly, grounded on anything underneath it. It's got a huge knowledge base that keeps expanding, but underneath, that's what Descartes wants to deal with, is that underneath. And if underneath all that is this possibility of some all-powerful entity that science itself cannot eliminate the possibility of, well, we got to have some way to try to eliminate that possibility if we want science to be on a firm foundation, or we want any other knowledge and truth-seeking endeavor. Well, Descartes, he solves this problem, he thinks. He solves it. How? He does so in Meditations 3. And this is where I give a brief kind of rundown of how he does this. But if you really want to see how he does it in the technical detail, you don't have to buy it. You don't. I'm not saying that, but it is worth understanding. It's not a matter of how he escapes this so much as it is a matter of how he does it. But it's still just the endeavor to put science on something more than just sensory experience. And it's all in our minds, by the way. But he's making claims and reasoning in his mind that he thinks locks back out to the real world to solve the demon deceiver problem. I mean, how does Descartes do this? The simple rundown is he says, okay, how do I eliminate the possibility that I may be dreaming all the time or deluded all the time by maybe a demon deceiver, all powerful? Well, first of all, he has other ideas in his mind. One of those ideas is, his self, that he exists. But he also has other ideas that he hadn't examined. One of those is he's examined his ideas about his body. He's examined his sensory ideas. He's dumped all those as doubtful. But he hadn't yet dumped an idea, of God. And this would be as sort of standard. It's got aspects of standard Christianity assumptions about God, like all powerful, all good, all perfect, infinite in all these ways. And so he starts there and he says, okay, there's this idea of God in my head. Did I put it there? Did my neighbors put it there? Did my education system put it there? Would any of those things have been powerful enough in and of themselves to account for the actual idea that I have and that he had in his own mind? Descartes says no. Now, there's detail. I'm not giving you all the detail of the argumentation. If you really want to understand it, you need to look at Meditations 3. But the key to it is it hangs on this notion of what has the necessary power and potency to cause an idea of an all good, all perfect, all infinite, in every possible way, divine being, an idea of that in one's mind. What has the power to actually get that in your mind? Because for Descartes, just like Bacon, just like a lot of people, the ideas in our minds have to come from somewhere. Whether they're our imagination, whether there's something someone outside of us says, whether it's based on something we've observed or seen, there's an origin to ideas. And so you have an idea of God. You have it in your head. Where did it come from? Descartes' going to say, instead of where did it come from, he's going to ask, what has the necessary oomph to get it in my mind? He would say, it couldn't be me. Why couldn't it be him? Because he's not infinite. He's a mortal being. And so you can't stack up mortality long enough to get to infinity. And remember, the idea of God in his head is infinite power, infinite knowledge, infinite wisdom, infinite perfection. There's nothing infinity about a human life. Everything about our world, and this is common at the time, especially of a medieval worldview, that's even in the Renaissance, even in this scientific era of Descartes, even up into the contemporary era, that life things don't live forever. If one thing that what you can see that humanity or other animals or the natural world, the belief that it has the power to cause, or any of those finite things is the idea of finite things. Descartes would say you as an individual cannot have just imagined an idea of God, because your imagination is limited by your own finitude. So it can't be an imagined idea by Descartes himself. Well, what about somebody else outside of him, other human beings? Well, they're finite too. Their imaginations are limited in just the same ways. Well, so they couldn't be the cause. Well, then what about that demon deceiver, though? That's hanging out there. Well, even if it was all powerful, it would not. The idea for Descartes, maybe there's some iffiness argumentatively here, but for him, a bad thing that's all powerful would not be able to cause the idea in his head of an all good, all perfect, infinite in every possible way being. That the only being that could cause such an idea in Descartes' own mind would be for that being itself to exist, and then therefore God exists, at least in the way that Descartes' idea of God is. And so that has to exist out in the world. Well, that's the way the argumentation works. The conclusion is, yep, an all good, all powerful, all perfect in every possible way God exists. Like those arguments we saw back in the week on medieval philosophy, proofs for the existence of God. Descartes offers one. But he's doing this in service to what? To be able to have somewhere to build the sciences on top of. Interesting. Just think about that. The Descartes doesn't think that the sciences can hold themselves up out of the sand or the murk if there's not something much more greater than the science practice itself to keep it up out of sinking or collapsing under its own weight. It's like trying to build a house and have it just floating in the air. You don't have it sitting on anything. And we're going to wrap this video up. Obviously, my voice is going. But I just find it so interesting, this point in history and what Descartes and Bacon were up to. But in the end, Descartes would say, if you can establish, which he thinks he did, that an all good, all powerful, all perfect, etc., divine being does exist in the world, in reality, not just in his head, then that all good being would not allow for Descartes or any other humans to be forever systematically deceived about everything. Everything can't be a constant dream state or delusion caused by an all-powerful demon. Well, first off, if an all-powerful good God is in play, then there can't be an all-powerful demon. Two entities can't have all the power at the same time. So if there's an all-powerful good God, there may be a demon, maybe lots of them. But what Descartes will have established, what he will have established is that there is not one that's powerful enough to deceive us about everything. And so with Descartes, what he has said is that if there's an all-good God, that will eliminate the possibility of an all-good, all-powerful God that's infinitely perfect, will eliminate the possibility all-powerful deceiver being that's tearing us up all the time in such a way mentally that we can never find any truth at all. That an all-good, all-perfect being, to that being, deception itself would be an imperfection. And that being, given that it's all good and all perfect and all powerful, would not allow deception to always reign supreme in our minds. And if all that's the case, then God itself anchors and serves as the metaphysical foundation. The existence of God as Descartes conceptualizes it is what serves as the foundation. That's what guarantees that all of the sciencey stuff you lay on top of this foundation is not all just mistaken human delusion. That's what a metaphysical foundation, or ontological in the sense that Descartes thinks that he is, in his mind, established through reasoning the existence of a divine being out in reality, that being guarantees that everything that goes forward is not always going to be delusion. And, when we do our experimentation, when we do all these things in science, it's not all just flapping out in the breeze that it could all be mistaken at any given point in time. What we would know, if Descartes was right, is that at least some of it is indeed true with a capital T. that some of it is objectively true. It's not just all made up stuff. It's not all just humans creating theories in the sky that may or may not ever map onto reality. Sure, people can say, well, we make technology that enables us to do things, so that's evidence that we're closer to truth. Not necessarily. That it could be that the technologies are just working inside the delusion. That we could find that the technologies have actually not been doing what we thought they were doing all along. On and on and on. That's what Descartes' up to. I mean, you can buy it or not. You can read Meditation 3. You can read all the meditations and the Discourse on Method, and you can see exactly how Descartes does all this stuff. But if you get a good copy of Discourses on Method, and those things are totally able to be found on the internet, you can find digital copies of this, where he has a book on optics, he has a book on meteorology. They were all published when the Discourse on Method was done. He has a book on mathematics that's at the same time. And so if you're interested in seeing what this polymath sort of Descartes, Descartes is polymath, very pushing the limits in multiple fields at his time. And you can get a sense that the whole purpose of the meditations and the Discourse on Method is to build a foundation upon which to then do the empirical style science stuff that Bacon's talking about. So Descartes' method will get you a metaphysical, cosmological, kind of reality grounded thing to stand on that makes all your science not disconnected or unfounded to the world. Bacon thinks it's enough to just pile up enough experiences and do enough experimentation to just sort out and eventually get to reality. Descartes does not. Descartes would think that's not sufficient, because what you need is something much more greater underneath all this, or on top of it, or surrounding it, to hold it all together. Otherwise, science is a house of cards. First of all, it could still be a house of cards with Descartes. But what Descartes has said, we need like a very stable granite table to build the house of cards on, rather than a sort of paper mache table flapping in the breeze that all the cards fall off, because we thought we had something, but we were totally deceived. Our theories we built up over hundreds of years all turn out to be upside down, which that does happen in science sometimes. So, and it's still going to happen even if you have a hardcore metaphysical, divinely grounded foundation like Descartes. But the idea is all is not always going to be lost if Descartes is right. And there's other people that have tried to do this. Descartes is just one. Like I say, Bacon and Descartes are just two people amongst hundreds of others that are trying to work out these same kind of issues. So, all that being said, we're going to wrap up the video. You can read through this. I do some more comparison with Bacon and Descartes. It's helpful. I mean, now, in terms of quest for truth, we always try to end with this. That do Descartes and Descartes' methods seem equally useful in the search for truth? Like Bacon's do the experimentation to account for faulty sensory stuff, and just keep doing this and creating these natural histories, data collection, and then you try to induce general principles off of that. I didn't mention much of that, but you can read it. We'll talk more about induction next week when we're into Hume. But the idea is, do they seem equally helpful? I mean, Descartes trying to secure a metaphysical foundation for the sciences. Bacon is a more concrete, in the lab, how would lab practice work foundation for the sciences. Bacon's method is focused on experience, and experience all the way up, all the way down. Descartes' method is focused on doubting in the mind to try to find certainties using your reasoning abilities. But then Descartes also adds in this very useful notion, and it's mentioned, this notion of hypothesis formation, that sensory claims should always be considered to be hypothetical. They may be true, maybe not. That's what we're going to be testing. That's a crucial piece to what contemporary science, is, what science became. So Descartes adds in, and moreover, Descartes tries to lock this stuff in through mathematics. And anybody that's in many of the science fields, underneath it all, you're going to find some mathematics. That's your quantification, turning things so you can count them and weigh them, measure them, all those things. You're going to be interacting with numbers as either a tool or as reality, depends on how you conceptualize mathematics. But it's crucially important, and Descartes very much emphasizing that. So both of these two, you need both of these two to get a feel for the different pieces of what eventually turned into science, but you need many more, but this is just our first run at them, just to give you a feel for the supposed scientific revolution. How did it get started in terms of what led up to it? Who were two of the major players in it? And then next week we'll go forward. And in the end, I also talk about epistemology. There's more questions here so that you can get kind of a feel for how epistemology works. All of this stuff comes into play during this era that we're talking about, this early modern and modern era that we're in. But I hope this video has been helpful. Until next time.